Bert, thanks again for the opportunity to come and speak about content management system and all of the things that you have to think of in order to successfully adopt it. I have four main talking points that I wanted to cover today. One is what a content management system is. Two, why anybody would want to adopt a CMS. Three, is it a change that's right for you? And ultimately, if you do decide to adopt a CMS, how do you go about the process of adopting it, rolling it out, training people to use it, and all of those types of things? So let's start out with part one, the what part. A CMS is software that lives on a server, that's accessed via a web browser, and is used to create content and modify assets and manage content overall. A pretty broad definition of what a CMS is, and using that, there are a lot of different types of software packages that could be considered a CMS. I have a slide that's going to be coming up shortly that addresses that. Within each CMS, typically there are multiple levels that people can use to manage content. A default CMS, when you get it, is going to typically ship with 4 different roles. One's an administrator role, one is a developer/designer role, an editor, and a contributor. At the top level, the administrator level basically is God. They run the system, they install the software, they configure things. When there are patches that come out, they apply it to the server. They basically keep your software healthy and running happily and add new features and functionality when you ask them to do so. A developer is responsible for creating content, creating macros or asset factories that are used to create common types of content. An editor is able to create and post and approve content, and ultimately a content contributor is somebody who is assigned tasks to create content and then submits it up to the editor for review. So those are the 4 main roles that almost every single content management system has. Often these different roles are blended together. There's crossover. The top 2 roles in the stack, the administrator and the developer, are often run by the same person. So if, for instance, you install WordPress to run a blog, you're more or less your own administrator and developer for that. The developer role might be shared to some extent by somebody else who might have created a theme or template that you install, but more or less you're responsible for running your own system. Also, the editor and contributor roles are often flattened and merged together. The reason to have the 2 is so that you can take advantage of workflow processes. So you could have a staff of 5 writers who are essentially assigned to write or develop some content, and ultimately an editor goes through and makes sure that it conforms to whatever style guide that you're writing to, that it's using the right terminology for your institution, etc. But a lot of times people merge those 2 roles together and simply post the content to their website. So we're talking about the varieties of CMSs that can be implemented. So with the definition of software that's installed on a server that people access through a web browser and they populate content, these are 9 major categories that fit into that. So informational websites, like an organizational website like MSU EDU would qualify as that. Blogs, like on WordPress or Blogger or TypePad or any of those types of services. Technically, forums are software that you enable community to start discussing and uploading and sharing content. Intranets, which are more like informational websites but are controlled by password protection but aren't necessarily enabled to have people post comments or respond to things. Portals, online instruction, social networks like Facebook are technically content management systems. Online stores, and essentially rich media and interactive applications that are posted online. So there's a lot of different kind of content management systems out there. There are 2 basic ways that CMSs function. There are push-based CMSs and there are pull-based CMSs. I want to show you how both of them work. A pull-based CMS, a visitor comes to a website, the CMS software is residing upon a web server. It queries a database that has all of the content, all the rules for how templates and layouts are supposed to look and how everything relates to one another. The CMS software takes the data it receives from the database, it puts it together in a way that makes sense, and then it delivers it back to the person who visited the website. So it's kind of like a quick roundabout circuit. Examples of pull-based CMSs, WordPress is a pull-based CMS. Drupal is, Joomla is, most all of the open source systems are. A push-based CMS, the website, the visitor comes to the website and a web server containing the data that they request simply returns it back to them, more or less like a standard web server. So part of the question is, where does CMS come into play for that? The CMS server itself is actually residing in a separate location from the web server. It's connected to a database. The database contains all of the content, information, and assets and rules for how the information is supposed to be displayed. But ultimately, all of that content is bundled up and sent over to the web server for delivery. So the two environments are completely separate. And there are pros and cons to doing an implementation like this, which we'll get into as we go along. And ultimately, when a website visitor comes through, they get the content from the server. So comparisons of the two in terms of pros and cons of each. And a little kind of caveat, this is rated G. There are a lot of CMSs out there. When I was putting this presentation together, I went out to cmsmatrix.org, and there was over 1,000 CMSs out there. So it's hard to have really clean rules saying this type of CMS does this and this other type of CMS does that, because there's lots of gray in between, and each can be customized to more or less do whatever you want it to do. So these are just general rules. A pull-based CMS has a persistent connection to the database. So the things that are really great about that is you can do dynamic interaction. So like WordPress has comments, if a user loads up a page and they want to say something, they can go to the form widget, they can type, and that data goes back to the database. And it's either processed to be published automatically, or it goes into a moderation queue. But that persistent connection to the database allows that interaction to more or less happen in real time. Developers can manage the look and feel of features and functionality, and editors can manage all of the content on the site. Those last two things are going to be pretty much common on any CMS. Using a pull-based CMS for multiple sites, you would essentially install the software on a web server, and you could use that to run kind of micro sites or landing pages within your site. But if you wanted two sites that were very, very different, so like president.msu.edu is very, very different from admissions.msu.edu. They're on separate servers, they have different purposes. In order to use that CMS on those different sites, you'd essentially have to do separate installations. Pretty easy to do. The challenges of this deployment method come when you try to scale it up to a large level. So it's not a big deal if you're using WordPress to run your own site, like I use it to run my blog. But when you have, say, 10 or 12 installations, WordPress releases updates all the time, usually once a month, which means you get to patch it on all 12 installations, which can be time-consuming and not very fun. Sharing assets across the sites can be a challenge as well. This is a gray area again. You can install some tools that make sharing of content easier, but if you really wanted to write, say, a program description, so the registrar's office says this is what the program description is, here's the requirements, and then that's reused on the admissions site, on a college level site, on a department level site, it would be really hard to easily have that work from one site to the next. Typically, the user roles are, it's not possible always to have really granular user roles, and what that means is the editor and the content contributor roles that we talked about before. When you have a site, more or less, if you're an editor, you can edit anything in the site. So if you had separate sites, so like say we installed WordPress or Drupal or whatever else on the MSU ED web server, we could host admissions on that, we could host the president's site on it, but somebody who's hosting Student Life could also update the president's site. And there are ways to have that not happen, but in most cases the open source pull-based systems don't have that level of granularity to say people have access to specific files. Also, all of the content that is managed on the site has to be managed in the CMS. So if you're going to a pull-based CMS, more or less all of your content has to be served from that. You can't have a file within a directory that's served from a different location. So if you have an about directory that has your mission statement and vision statements and everything else, but you have a dynamic part that has a staff directory, all of that has to reside in the CMS. It can't reside in another system. So it's kind of an all or nothing approach to managing your content. And ultimately, customizing the software can be time consuming and difficult to scale up. So one of the things that we've found, probably all of us when we're developing websites, is we come up with a really great look and feel and template and design, and a client comes in and they want something different that the template wasn't designed to do. So they want some kind of animated thing on the home page, or they want a staff directory, or they want a blog or an RSS feed. So we typically customize everything that we do. Well, each of those customizations, depending on how you do it with a pull-based CMS, can become very, very difficult to replicate. So if you modify the code that came with the system, you have to remember that you modified it, so when you patch it, you reapply your modification and also make sure that it doesn't break anything in terms of security. Really easy to do on one site, but as you get into 10 or more sites, it becomes a royal pain in the neck. A push-based CMS. Content's pushed from the CMS and database to the web server, so there's no persistent connection between the web server and the database/CMS. What that means is that you can have dynamic content, but it can't necessarily have a significant amount of interaction. I'm going to get a little bit techie here, so please forgive me if you're a non-techie. You can have an XML file that serves like a database, so it could have staff information like name, email address, and phone number, and you can have PHP files that more or less transform that based on what buttons a user presses, so it's kind of dynamic. But they can't comment on the content, they can't rate it, they can't more or less feed content back to the database that then transforms the experience or the information that's out on the website. Developers manage the look and feel of the features and functionality just like the other site. Editors manage all of the content. And portions of the site can be managed in the CMS. So one advantage of a push-based CMS is that it pretty much doesn't care what pages in the site it's managing. It can manage 80% of the site. So like in an example of an admissions website, they have custom software that handles applications processing and status. You can leave that part of the website within the proprietary system and wrap the design, look, and feel, and the help pages and all of the other content within the CMS. So it allows you a little bit more flexibility in terms of migrating from one platform to the next. Using a push-based CMS for multiple sites. So if you're going to you've got your first site up and running and you want to launch a new website. You essentially get your configure information for all of the different web servers that you have, each with their own domain, and you configure the CMS to push content out to each of them. The potential advantage of this is that if you patch the template or content in one location, it automatically feeds it out to all of them. If you patch the CMS software for security reasons, it patches every single site that uses the CMS for maintaining the content. The challenges to using a push-based CMS. The dynamic, live, interactive content is a real disadvantage of this platform. So you can't really do comments, you can't do voting, you can't do discussion forums. There's always workarounds. You can install other software that would allow you to do that. You can use Discuss to manage conversation features. You can integrate your websites with Facebook to have commenting of content, but ultimately as a turnkey solution it just doesn't work with all of that initially. User content and multi-site management can be very, very complicated. So on paper it sounds really great. You do templates once and you publish them out everywhere, but again, typically the clients want to customize the site to some extent. So trying to figure out what baseline solution is going to work for most of the people. How do you give them enough flexibility and options so that things can be modular and they can personalize the site in some way requires a lot of planning because every user is significantly different. And more or less leveraging the full advantages takes a significant amount of time and planning. So that's the end of part one. There are CMSs out there. Part two, why would you want to use a CMS? There's a handful of benefits of why you would want to use a CMS. Ultimately, a lot of the content contributors feel frustration because they have content and they want to publish it right now. But in order to publish that content, they have to call Bob over in the technical area. He's out doing a service call, and so they send him an email and it might get published at some point in time. Bob is a smart person and he actually should be working on databases or other things, and so publishing content is like a low skill level, not high priority thing in his day. So ultimately, using a CMS can make everybody happy. The developers can make really cool features that people want to use. The content contributors can publish content to their sites really easy. It sounds really good. A CMS allows you to apply some rules and standards. So part of our fear as web developers of giving the keys over to the clients is that they will cut and paste code in that breaks the site, they'll delete something, and the site will break, and ultimately things won't look very good. So it's kind of a nightmare that we all avoid and just don't give them access to sites. So with a CMS, you can protect the user from making mistakes, and you can also protect the integrity of your site so that they don't have the ability to go in and make text that's blinking, or that it's too big, or uploading an image that's 50 megs and really should just be 50K. You can improve content quality. So if you implement workflows for really important information like tuition details, requirements for graduation, that you want multiple pages in your site to use, you can have one content writer write it once, and then it's repurposed across all of the sites. If they find an error, which often they do, they can update it, and it gets updated everywhere, so it keeps it simple and clean for everybody. There's a potential to reduce long-term operating costs. I think one of the concerns with this is that people think that CMS is going to solve all of their problems. It's kind of like in the early 90s where all you had to do to be successful was have a website and you could be the next Amazon. Long-term, there's the potential to save money, because a lot of us get in situations where we get a site up really, really fast, and the person who made it for us goes on somewhere else and is doing great things, and then we don't know what to do with it. And so we essentially do the whole process over again, and that cycle repeats every 1 to 3 years. That's kind of expensive and time consuming. So using a standardized platform means, for one, there's always an on-campus or institutional level of support that can assist you from wherever you're left at when your tech support people move on to other pastures. There's also the potential to save money on software licenses. So there's about 10,000 people who work at Michigan State. Say we want 1 in 10 of them to be able to access websites. If we bought licenses for Contribute, which I don't know how much they run these days, but let's say $100. $100 times 1,000 people's $100,000. That's significantly more than it costs to get any enterprise level content management system or pay somebody to implement one for you. And that's a cost that more or less is a recurring cost that happens whenever Adobe upgrades their software. So there's potential to have cost savings that could be meaningful, or take revenues that could be put into other more meaningful things. There's also the potential to have deep and meaningful levels of staff development. So kind of like trying to build a winning basketball team. If everybody is learning to play the same game, then they can help each other and improve their overall effectiveness. So I pulled a use case. I surfed the web, Googled a whole bunch of things trying to find out what's the business case for a higher educational institution to adopt a CMS. And I came across a statement on Utah's university website. And I highlighted the parts that I thought were meaningful. So they say good content management makes content more widely available and helps maintain the quality and integrity of information as it's used. The value of content is increased by making it reusable in other places beyond its original purpose. An article could be used in a recruitment area, it could be used in a student office, it could be used on an admissions page and quickly updated and kept in sync. So from their perspective, they're really seeing the value in terms of being able to manage the quality of information and repurpose it throughout the entire organization. So they're really getting into some of the core concepts of content management. They're going beyond just publishing content. In 15 minutes, it's not possible to give you absolutely everything you'd want to know, so I added a couple footnotes on here. Where to learn more about how universities have successfully adopted these, check out Carnegie Mellon and Ball State's website. They have overviews that talk about what CMS is, how to adopt it, what types of support are in place, how they got it to work. And these slides, do you share them with the rest of the group via email? All right, it'll be online somewhere. Also collected 4 different perspectives on CMS. So the first, the higher ed CMS usage, was a new one to me. It was a survey that was done in March 2010, and they had a whole bunch of people in higher ed say what kind of CMSs they're using. So it's really interesting to see how it breaks down between Drupal and Cascade and WordPress and everything else. The others are specific use cases. So some folks are using Drupal to do online education. Some folks are using WordPress to run their Writing Center website. And the Cascade server, which is the university enterprise CMS, there's a case study up on the vendor's website about how Indiana University has adopted that to manage their web content. So part 3, how do you decide if CMS is right for you? CMS is going to be right for you if you have more than one person who's going to be managing content. If you don't have more than one person, CMS is probably not worth it for you. If you have team members who are contributing at different levels, so you have somebody who's a basic user and you have somebody who is a coding ninja, they can make whatever you need. Just give them a little bit of time. They're like Batman. They'll come back with an excellent solution. If you need to maintain a high standard of quality and consistency, you want to lock down places of the layout so that people don't break things. If you want to share content, if you want to automate and schedule content. For me, this was a huge thing as I began using CMS-related stuff. So I can schedule content to launch at the start of fall that says, hey, students, welcome back to campus. And when it's graduation time, I can say, hey, have a nice holiday break and good luck with your graduation and work after that. There's also the ability to implement workflows for content creation and review. CMS might be wrong for you if you lack reliable and adequate resources in terms of support and training and technical development. I think that's really important, regardless of how great the tool is or how inexpensive it was or how open it was or how expensive and fully feature-rich it was. If you don't have proper support, it just isn't going to work and it's probably not worth doing it. If you plan to send updates only to one person who posts everything using the CMS, it's probably not right for you. The whole point is to enable a lot of people to be able to manage content. If this is your first time using a CMS and you have a really, really important site that's got to go online or it's even past due, this is not the right time to adopt a CMS. Also, if you believe a CMS means immediate versus long-term reduction of costs or time required to maintain content, is probably not something that you're going to want to go into. Or also if you want complete freedom of layouts. So in some cases, we need to be able to make immersive, rich experiences. So if we're doing a microsite that's just for recruitment of students, while long-term that could be designed to be maintained through a CMS, in the short term, because of quick time turnarounds and other interactive features, it's probably not ideal to go into the CMS. How am I doing on time? 1 minute. Okay. So standard workflow process, people have stuff they want to do, they send it to the web person says yeehaw, and he puts it on the website. Afterwards, a whole bunch of stuff can happen. The web person says, guys, I set up something and you can handle most of the content. I think the key here is you can't handle all of the content. There's going to be some cases where you still are going to need your developer, but in most cases you'll be able to do stuff. So a writer can be assigned something, they can send it to an editor, they can publish it. A helpful person can say, oh my God, I found something that's like so antiquated and out of date, it's embarrassing, we really need it off now. They can just go ahead and take it offline. And all the navigation's automatically updated so the links aren't out there. Part 4, getting there. 4 phases for getting there. 1, have a plan. Have people who are your executive stakeholders who want you to do this and understand why you're doing it. Have clear objectives, tactics, and deadlines. If you don't have deadlines, you're never going to get it done. Organize a team that has a lot of different skills. You need a technical person, you need a marketing person, you need somebody who knows either how to do everything because they're Superman, or you need a bunch of group of people that can be your kind of wonder force that gets everything done. Phase 2, evaluate your options. Identify what you want the CMS to do. There's over 1,000 out there, and there's a reason why, because they're designed for doing different things. If you want to run an online store, there are certain ones that are good for that and others that aren't. I like the first page of the manual for Drupal if you're learning how to develop it. It says if you want to run a blog, this might not be the CMS for you. You might want to use WordPress or some other familiar tool. Test, evaluate it, and ultimately pick something, migrate your content. I'm going to cut through these so we can get to questions. Figure out what content you're putting out there, train your people, implement it, or outsource implementing it if you don't want to implement it yourself. And ultimately, long term, you have to support your people. You have to have sufficient training in place. You have to be prepared to answer their questions. Show them how to use it. Be prepared for the first 2 to 4 weeks after they start using it that they're going to call you every day or multiple times a day. So be available for that each time after you train somebody new. and also be prepared to figure out how you're going to handle change. They're ultimately going to say, go through a phase of saying this tool is really great, we love it, it's wonderful, to, you know, this doesn't do what Facebook does, it doesn't do what we need it to do something different. So you have to figure out how you're going to handle change. How are you going to evaluate new features and keep your platform secure, or how are you going to prioritize those things as they come through? Thank you.